Before there was Leatherface, before Psycho, before horror had a face, there was a quiet man from Wisconsin named Ed Gein. He wasn't a serial killer in the way you'd expect. He wasn't a criminal mastermind, and he didn't even look dangerous at all. But what police found inside his home shocked the world and changed horror forever. This is the true story of Ed.
Did you work all night at that time? I should think you had.
That's right.
What would you do with the sexual part?
That was in.
One was painted, they said.
Oh, that one, when they died, I just put the thing over it. The girl didn't like it,
How did you start?
Like I say, not before years.
So there's a bunch of photographers from the newspapers want to take your picture. You want to take your picture?
No, it's not yet. Till we get to straighten off.
Would you enjoy it while you were doing it?
That's the worst part of it. I mean, they didn't then. I knew better, restless.
When you dig these graves up, you were kind of in a haze too, is that it?
That's what I could do. Just, how you do it.
And then one time you said you were trying to realize what you were doing and you covered her up without taking anything.
That's right.
What would you do with the sexual part?
They them in the box, that was in.
And what would you do with the head?
That must have been taken from reading about in these magazines and everything. Taking the flesh off like a headhunter.
In the quiet farmland of Plainfield, Wisconsin, where the cornfields stretch endlessly and the nights fall heavy with silence, there once lived a man so unassuming, so forgettable, that no one suspected the horror growing behind his walls. His name was Edward Theodore Gein. To his neighbors, he was harmless, polite, strange, maybe, but gentle. A man who babysat children, a man who shoveled snow, a man who even waved from the road and kept to himself. But behind that thin smile and slouched posture was a man shaped by isolation, obsession, and a childhood so warped that it would eventually inspire some of the most terrifying figures in horror history, including Leatherface. This is the story of Ed Gein. Not a monster born overnight, but one slowly constructed over decades. Ed Gein was born on August 27, 1906, in LA, Cross County, Wisconsin. His parents, George and Augusta Gein, purchased a small farm outside, a place deliberately chosen for its isolation. Augusta did not want her sons exposed to the outside world. She believed modern society was sinful, women were immoral, alcohol was evil, and the world beyond the farm was full of corruption, waiting to claim her children. From the very beginning, Ed's life was fenced, and not just by land, but by ideology. The Gein farmhouse would become a prison of rules, sermons, and fear. If there is one name inseparable from Ed Gein's story, it is Augusta Gein. She was deeply religious, fanatically so, a strict Lutheran who believed that most people, especially women, were instruments of sin. Augusta regularly preached to her sons about the wickedness of desire, the filth of sexuality, and the punishment awaiting sinners. She read from the Bible obsessively, often focusing on passages about death, judgment, and damnation. To Ed, his mother was not just a parent. She was authority, truth, and God's voice on earth. And she made one thing very clear. Women were dangerous. Ed was a shy, awkward child. He struggled in school. He was teased by classmates. He had difficulty forming friendships. And every time he returned home, Augusta reinforced the idea that this rejection was a blessing. She told him other children were sinful, that laughter led to temptation, that curiosity led to hell. Ed learned early that obedience meant survival. When his older brother, Henry, showed signs of independence, questioning their mother's beliefs, Ed never did. He clung to Augusta. She was his anchor, his protector, his entire world. Ed's father, George Gein, was largely absent, emotionally and physically. He was an alcoholic, unreliable, and often unemployed. Augusta despised him. She openly criticized George in front of the boys, painting him as weak and sinful. This left Ed with a warped family hierarchy. A passive, broken father, a dominated and righteous mother, and two sons trapped in between. Ed learned that masculinity was shameful and submission was safety. In 1944, a fire broke out on the Gein property. Henry and Ed were working together to control a brush fire when something went wrong. When authorities arrived, Henry Gein was missing. Later, his body was found nearby. Officially, Henry died from asphyxiation, but there were bruises on his head. The case was never fully investigated, and Ed Gein, quiet, soft-spoken Ed, was never considered a suspect. With Henry gone, Ed was alone with Augusta, and soon, even she would be taken from him. Augusta Gein died in 1945 after suffering a series of strokes. Ed was devastated. He sealed off her bedroom, preserving it like a shrine, untouched, frozen in time. The rest of the house decayed, dirt piled up, rooms filled with junk. The structure rotted from the inside out. But Augusta's room remained immaculate. To Ed, she was still alive there, still watching, still judging, and with her death, Ed's last tether to reality began to unravel. After Augusta's death, Ed lived alone. No family, no close friends, no guidance. He survived by doing odd jobs, babysitting and scavenging. He spent his free time reading pulp magazines, true crime stories, and books about anatomy and human remains. And slowly, something inside him shifted. Loneliness became obsession, curiosity became fixation, and fantasy began to replace reality. To the people of Plainfield, Ed Gein was harmless. They described him as childlike, polite, and a little strange. No one feared him. No one suspected him. And that was exactly why no one noticed what he was becoming. This was not the beginning of Ed Gein's crimes. This was the incubation period. A lifetime of control, repression, and isolation, fermenting quietly in a farmhouse at the edge of town. Everything breaks. The graves, the murders, the discoveries that would shock the nation and inspire some of the most iconic horror villains ever created. Leatherface was fiction. Ed Gein was not. After Augusta Gein's death, time stopped inside the farmhouse. Outside, seasons changed, crops were planted and harvested, children grew older. The town of Plainfield carried on as it always had. But inside Ed Gein's home, decay crept in quietly. The house grew darker, dirt collected in corners, newspapers stacked into towers. The smell, something neighbors later described as off, hung permanently in the air. Ed slept wherever he pleased. He ate canned food and scraps. He wandered the property at night. And in his mind, his mother truly never left. Her voice lingered. Her rules still applied. Her hatred of women still echoed in his thoughts. But now, there was no one left to stop him. Ed Gein's isolation was complete. He spoke to almost no one beyond brief exchanges in town. When he did talk, he laughed nervously, often at inappropriate moments. He avoided eye contact. He smiled too long. People found him odd, but never threatening. Children liked him. Parents trusted him. That trust would later haunt the town. As the years passed, Ed's inner world began to consume him. He read obsessively true crime magazines, anatomy textbooks, stories about grave robbing and body preservation. He began to develop a fascination with death, not as an ending, but as a state of being. To Ed, bodies were not sacred. They were objects, shells, things that could be repurposed. And slowly, quietly, Ed Gein began visiting the local graveyards. He went at night. He knew which graves were fresh. He avoided attention, avoided damage, avoided being seen. Ed Gein did not dig randomly. He targeted graves that reminded him of his mother. Middle-aged woman, strong woman, authoritative woman. He brought them home. And inside the farmhouse, far from the eyes of Plainfield, Ed Gein began constructing a world where death and identity blurred together. What Ed created inside the house was not chaos. It was ritual. He organized items carefully. He preserved certain rooms. He treated some objects with reverence. This was not violence driven by rage. It was driven by fixation, by the need to control what had once controlled him. For years, this went unnoticed, until November 16th, 1957. That morning, hardware store owner Bernice Warden opened her shop like any other day. She was reliable, respected, and well known in Plainfield. By mid-morning, the store was empty. Her truck was still outside, the cash register was open, and Bernice Warden was gone. When police investigated, they found something unsettling. The last entry in the store's receipt book listed a single item: antifreeze, and next to it, a name: Ed Gein. Authority went to the Gein farmhouse that evening. What they discovered would permanently scar everyone involved. The house was dark, silent, unlocked. Inside, officers encountered conditions beyond anything they had imagined. Rooms cluttered with debris, furniture covered in dust, strange objects hanging from walls and ceilings. And then they found Bernice Warden. What police uncovered that night defied explanation. The farmhouse was filled with items made from human remains, collected, altered, and preserved over years. Investigators found bowls, furniture, decorations, and clothing crafted from skin and bone. Not hidden, displayed. This was not secrecy. This was Ed Gein's reality. Ed was arrested later that night at a grocery store. He did not resist. He did not run. He calmly admitted to the killing. And then, almost casually, he began talking. During questioning, Ed Gein spoke openly. He described his grave robbing as a hobby. He claimed he never harmed most of the bodies while they were alive. He explained his actions with childlike detachment, as if discussing farm chores. There was no visible guilt, no visible fear, just confusion about why anyone else would be upset. Doctors later concluded that Ed Gein suffered from severe mental illness. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia. He experienced hallucinations. He believed his mother still spoke to him, and he believed that by surrounding himself with parts of women, he could somehow bring her back, or become her. The trial never became the spectacle many expected. Ed Gein was found legally insane and committed to a mental institution. He would never stand trial in the traditional sense. He would never fully explain himself, and he would never return to Plainfield as a free man. Ed Gein spent the rest of his life moving between psychiatric hospitals. Staff described him as cooperative, quiet, polite. He helped with chores. He followed rules. Some said he was a model patient. Others said there was something deeply unsettling about him, something hollow behind the eyes. Ed Gein died on July 26, 1984, at the age of 77. He was buried in Plainfield. For years, his grave was vandalized by curiosity seekers until authorities eventually removed the headstone altogether. Even in death, Ed Gein was not left alone. But Ed Gein's story did not end with his death. In fact, that was when it truly began. His crimes shocked the nation, but unlike other killers, Ed Gein's body count was small. His impact, however, was enormous. Authors and filmmakers became fascinated by him, not because of how many people he killed, but because of who he was. A quiet man, a mother's boy, a monster who looked nothing like a monster. Ed Gein directly inspired Norman Bates in Psycho, Buffalo Bill in The Silence of the Lambs, and most famously, Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Leatherface masks, the skin, the idea of wearing another person, the isolated farmhouse, the family man trapped inside a decaying home. All of it traces back to Ed Gein. But here's the most unsettling truth. Ed Gein was not a criminal mastermind. He was not intelligent. He was not charismatic. He was not evil in the way the movies portray evil. He was broken, shaped slowly by control, fear, repression, and isolation. A man raised without love, without freedom, without identity. Ed Gein did not snap. He wrote it, piece by piece, over decades, until there was nothing left to stop the fantasies from becoming real. And that is why his story still terrifies us, because he wasn't hiding in shadows. He was standing in plain sight, smiling, babysitting, waving from the road. Ed Gein did not look like a monster, but monsters don't always look the part. Sometimes, they look exactly like the man next door. If you found this story worth telling, consider leaving a like or subscribing. It helps keep these stories alive and heard. Thank you for watching, and remember, the most unsettling stories aren't the one we imagine. They're the ones that actually happened.